Hi, everyone. It's the UnMusking show again. I call it a comedy show to be able to freely speak my mind without having to delete my account afterwards. This is the third episode, and by now, some of the more attentive viewers probably noticed there's a different movie poster behind me in each one. These posters are not random. Today, it's Don't Look Up with Leo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence. Remember that one? Two scientists discover a giant world-ending meteor on a collision course with Earth, but they are largely ignored by the politicians who only care about the elections, ratings, and bailing out their idiot children. At first, I was like, man, that's really spot on. But then I thought, not really. The reality is much more absurd than that. The truth of the matter is, these days our American government wouldn't even bother shooting the asteroid. Rather, they would slap it with sanctions and blame Russia for the trouble. So here's what we'll talk about today. I'm talking about the Western world because it's where I live. I know it well, so I know when the fish starts rotting from the head down. Thus, I'd like to highlight 3 signs of a brewing crisis of political leadership in the West. First, the leaders no longer represent the interests of their citizens. Just look at Biden. He stands for democracy, the war in Syria, Taiwan's freedom, independent Ukraine, gay and trans rights, for everything except your average Joe. So who's calling the shots when it comes to U.S. policies these days? Britney Spears?
I strongly disagree with Mr. Musk. It's just a matter of remembering what he said.
And if we turn our sights to Europe, we'll see it's not much better. European leaders are forced to enact policies which benefit the United States, not European citizens. And for example, they have to play it cool and keep quiet after a pipe supplying affordable gas to Europeans gets blown up. Sure, that's what strong leaders do.
I believe that European leaders are collectively accountable for the decisions I make.
Here's the second sign of the leadership crisis. Political leaders of the West are simply unable to handle the challenges they are facing these days. A perfect example is the recent COVID-19 pandemic, the most documented pandemic in humanity's history. As far as organizing the COVID response process is concerned, everyone had the same starting position. No one knew what COVID was. No one experienced anything like that before. There wasn't a country with a healthcare system capable of handling it. So everyone was figuring it out on the fly. As the dust settles, we can now see who excelled and who failed this test. Here are the final stats depicting the COVID costs for the US and the UK, and here are the figures for Japan and South Korea. Sure, we can say that Asians have a different physiology, immune system, and social discipline. Okay, let's look at Sweden then. Regardless of one's thoughts on them, they made their own choice in tackling COVID, and looks like it paid off. Sweden government said from the get-go that they would not impose a lockdown. If they die, they die, convenient. You're all Vikings. Some will just arrive in Valhalla a bit earlier than others. Now let's turn back to the United States. Trump initially denied there even was a problem.
Some people call it the Chinese flu.
Then Biden decided that drowning the issue in money at the cost of increasing national debt is a good idea. I'd say this is as bad as it gets, but then again, we have the United Kingdom. First, they screwed around for a bit and then finally announced a lockdown with some of the harshest rules in Europe. Then they got scared it would cripple the economy, so they opened up the restaurants and even paid for half of the bill. Long story short, a second COVID wave hit, which prompted another complete lockdown and naturally did cripple the economy. Bravo. So here comes the third sign of the leadership crisis: inability to foresee the consequences of own actions and flawed or even non-existent strategic thinking.
The United States is a superpower. We can't be bothered thinking about consequences of our actions. We'll just make a movie where our decisions are justified.
Decisions made by Western leaders lately quite often backfire. Remember the Taliban? They were propped up by the West as a force to challenge the USSR presence in the area. Or let's take economic sanctions. The US imposes sanctions against North Korea. European countries follow suit because of course they do. And what do we have? Kim Jong-un is still gaining weight. Sure, most North Koreans are getting leaner, but what really matters is that now they all think they're surrounded by enemies, that they have nothing to lose, and all they need is rockets, and lots of them. Or take US sanctions against Iran. No planes, no cars, no computers. 30 years later, life is much worse for the average Iranian citizen, but they aren't any fonder of the United States. Still, Iran remains a major player in the Middle East. Here's the latest example. We all know the United States support Taiwan, the country that's making over half of all semiconductor chips in the world. So basically they're like KFC, but with semiconductors instead of chicken. So the US slams China with sanctions and cuts them off from semiconductor shipments. What does China do? Buys a bunch of manufacturing equipment, bans export of raw materials used for semiconductor production, and starts making their own chips. In 10 years, China is expected to push out Taiwan from the semiconductor market.
Once we start supporting someone, there is no escaping our help.
Remember Wag the Dog? The satirical movie about the US government? If they filmed it today, they'd have to call it Dog Keeps Biting Own Tail, Harder and Harder. It's too early to calculate the effect of sanctions against Russia, but something tells me it will blow up in America's face. These days, America really needs a partner in the Middle East. Israel and the Arabs are at it again, and we really don't need another world war. Currently, we can either let Ukraine down or go on a spending spree to finance both conflicts, increasing our ever-growing debt. And the bottom line is, sanctions, of course, make lives difficult for the countries they affect. What they don't do is change their worldview or policies. US sanctions have only proven to make them conspire against the US and cripple its allies. Europe is starting to rethink its partnership with the United States, as it's more of a BDSM relationship these days. Basically, Washington resembles a man swatting a hornet's nest with a stick and then complaining about looking like a potato. We see that the world is in turmoil. It's utterly unpredictable and turbulent. No one can save us but ourselves. Bruce Willis is retired, after all. Honestly, if there was an asteroid hurling towards Earth and a manned mission would save us, would you send an 80-year-old man to do the job?
This is my official statement as the President of the United States. I am a young person. Check it out. What's up?
Back in the day, the United States had true leaders, people who single-handedly changed the course of history and overcame massive political challenges. Lincoln, Roosevelt, Reagan, even. After all, that man knew a lot of jokes and managed to bring down Soviet Union. Yeah, any one of us would love to put this on our resume. Same goes for the UK. No longer do they have Churchills and Thatchers. I find it hard to believe Rishi Sunak is capable of persuading the House of Commons with another blood, sweat, and tears speech, unless it's a particularly spicy Indian dish. You know the saying, while the origin is unclear, its message still makes sense. Hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times.
I hate Africa. Why did they choose my presidency to stop pretending they respect France?
On the other hand, imagine Winston Churchill becoming United Kingdom's prime minister today. I can see the tweets following him assuming office. Now answer this question, would you vote for a president who would send your sons and husbands to the army and use them to quell protests in Maryland? Of course not. Lincoln could not possibly win presidency in the modern world. Turns out the social and political institutions created by the Western world, on one hand, safeguard stability of the system, regardless of the person assuming the office. On the other hand, they allow anyone to become the president. It's like a democratic trap. The liberal system is designed in a way that allows the elites to promise anything and everything the voters want to hear, win elections, and then do whatever they want with no repercussions. And there's a name for it in the business world, seagull management. The boss rushes over, makes a lot of noise, poops all over the place, and leaves. Let's take a look at America's main rival and its leader. He climbed the statesman ladder to the top, stepped on each rung without falling down once. His father was part of Mao Zedong's inner circle. However, in 1962, he was purged and Xi Jinping was exiled to China's poorest province. The following 7 years, Xi basically lived in a cave and used a bucket for a toilet. I wonder if Biden, Macron, or Schultz ever pooped in a bucket?
Not once. But if America tells me to, I am ready.
Eventually, Xi joins the party, and over the span, 25 years, becomes the governor of the Fujian province. During his rule, he established cooperation with Taiwan and boosted the region's investment appeal. Eventually, he is transferred to the Central Committee, and in 2012, he becomes China's leader. Let's see if Xi Jinping exhibits the 3 signs of leadership crisis. Number 1, does he represent the interests of China's citizens? These are the incomes for Chinese citizens during Xi Jinping's rule. And here's the number of people who climbed above the poverty line throughout the period. To put things into perspective, imagine all residents of California, New York, Texas, Florida, and Illinois suddenly go from being barefoot and hungry to having shoes and eating every day. I'd like to remind you that the regular citizens don't directly vote in China, so winning hearts and minds doesn't matter there. China's government prioritizes economic prosperity of its citizens over their liberties as they aim to bolster domestic trade. This is done to ensure that if a confrontation with the West actually happens, all the supply has enough demand to keep the wheels of the economy turning. What about the second sign of leadership crisis? How does China's government react to unprecedented challenges? Let's take COVID response as an example. While I agree that you can't really treat people that way, I understand what would happen if we let the virus run rampant in a population of 1.5 billion. We'd still be getting new mutations month after month. As I mentioned, the government prioritizes the economy. During the pandemic, it actually grew, and this means they've accomplished their goals while at the same time minimizing the death toll. However depressing this may sound, authoritarian systems are better equipped to deal with unprecedented challenges. The third sign of weak leadership is lacking strategic thinking. That's definitely not the case in China. The civilization is almost 5,000 years old and has historically planned its moves in the long term, planning, developing, and negotiating their way to a better deal. Just look at the prices Russia was charging for its gas. Compare Europe and China. Have you seen people buying snow shovels in summer? It's cheaper due to seasonal discounts. Now imagine the savings if 1.5 billion people doing that. China's international politics also favor long-term thinking. They build infrastructure and invest in areas they believe have good prospects for future profits. So basically anywhere except for the Terminator franchise.
Hurrying and short-term results are just showmanship. It's important if you want to be elected. No elections means no hurrying.
No, of course, I don't think China and Xi Jinping are perfect. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, as they say. Xi, unlike his predecessors, decided to stay in power after 2 terms. Paradoxically, all countries striving for socialism sooner or later turn into monarchies. Moreover, Xi is often criticized for his overly harsh war on corruption and violent suppression of Hong Kong. He may seem calm as a boa, but when push comes to shove, he becomes a dragon. But unlike the liberal principle of first among equals, China has the notion of the great helmsman, a person who has both the power and the responsibility to govern the country through tough times, no matter what. I think that after renaming Twitter, the next logical step is renaming yourself on Twitter. The conclusion is pretty straightforward. Without social institutions and a system of checks and balances, it takes a strong personality to become a leader. At the same time, it means the leader will always be authoritarian.
I'd also like to be a tyrant, but my wife won't let me.
So what needs to happen in order for strong leaders to emerge in Western democracies? The modern electoral system, especially political parties acting as a filter of sorts, is designed to favor not the strong and the bold, but those who can expertly navigate the political flow. Basically, we're being governed by logs, which didn't sink, or whatever else doesn't sink. And thanks to liberalism, these logs will never be accountable if the house they built falls apart. If this is how things are, the least we can do is limit their capacity of making stupid decisions. Again, we need to follow 3 simple rules. Number 1, leaders have to act in the best interests of their citizens. That means they should stop helping countries which Americans can find on the map. If you want people to learn geography, you should pump more money in education, not toppling regimes in the Middle East. Number 2, a leader needs to know how to solve problems never encountered before. So how do we figure out if someone is able to tackle a crisis without causing a pandemic or economic recession? Since this is a comedy show, this is how we do it. Everyone watched Squid Game, right? You know, that show with players participating in hellish challenges where elimination means death. So let's do the same thing with politicians competing in the game. Candidates running for president, senate, or governor positions. Those who win can run the actual campaign, and those who lose, well, they become heroes. They've protected America from unlucky leadership. Don't you agree that it makes things so much easier? You would know if someone is worth voting for or avoiding at all costs. So, who among the current world leaders would last longer?
I don't like to brag, but I'm the youngest Western leader.
I think the youngest ones should go first.
Rule number 3, a leader has to feel the weight of their decisions. And the only way to ensure it is to make them accountable for the fate of their country, even after they leave the office. When it comes to politics and the economy, consequences often follow actions with a lag of several years, and the person who took said actions is long gone from the office, starring in commercials and jetting around the globe as guest lecturers. And to remedy this, I suggest we adopt a law making all political leaders financially liable for their decisions. Let's call it an incompetency tax. Take Barack Obama, for example. Before his presidency, his family was worth about $1.3 million. Currently, their worth is estimated to be from $70 to $135 million. Let's average it to 100 mil. Meanwhile, the US economy grown by 82% since Obama last term. If his personal economy grew as much as the national one, he'd be worth only $2.24 million. Thus, everything else, $97.76 million under the new law, would be considered enrichment through speculative trading and eligible for confiscation by the government. This will work. You know why? Because no matter how dumb the husband is, his wife will never let him lose so much money.
My wife doesn't need money. France has excellent retirement benefits. For now.
So what's the bottom line? True leaders need to work for the benefit of the common people, even if it requires fighting the system from within. But the system doesn't want to be fixed, and thus chews out and spits out strong leaders. So it's up to us. Citizens of the West, myself included, need to stop voting for people who fail to follow the aforementioned rules. Otherwise, the future of the United States and all the Western world with it will resemble Joe Biden's bodily fluids. Murky and troublesome. I said future, but actually it might already be the present. Tune in for the next episode, U.S. National Debt or Consequences of Living Beyond Your Means.